Jessie Chahal. Jessie is also the founder and director of Bloom PR Media Comms Union Berhad and dabbles in the F&B industry with her artisan food delivery service. And she is a fellow at the Selangor State Government's Asian Women Leaders Network Cohort 2020. May I now invite to the stage, along with the panelists, Ms. Jessie Chahal. Jessie? And following her, it gives me great pleasure to invite the panelists on stage, starting with Mr. Javier Rucas, Dr. Wu Tukert, Dr. Johanna Lohr, Dr. Ian Yeoman, and Ms. Lau Yin Mei. Let's give them a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. and Madam MC. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon, and thank you, or rather, almost afternoon. Thank you for being here with us. I'm sure everyone's trickling in from outside as well. We'll just give it a minute or two. Panelists, thank you very much for being here as well. It is super interesting to have this discussion with all of you today. It is a meeting of minds, of people who are passionate within the same industry. Now, tourism's recovery from wide-ranging impacts of the global pandemic has affected us at multiple levels, but it has also presented this wonderful opportunity, what we've termed as the Great Reset. Of course, it has the opportunity to address long-standing challenges and, of course, underlying issues and lessons that we can apply from recovery of a pandemic into an endemic phase right now. Experts have, of course, already recognized that this is a transitioning phase which will lead us to a future state of affairs, and the future looks quite different from what we know it. Which is why, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you into our discussion today and implore you to please pick the brains of our experts here who've done much research and analysis to post your questions to them during our Q&A session. Our session today is, of course, going to look at decoding tourism futures, foresight, and scenarios. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have also a web-based application called slido.com where you can access through your mobile phone and post your questions there for our panelists to take on in a short while. The code is WTC2022. So please do that, and we will get those questions up here on the stage. I will quickly introduce the speakers before they speak, and after every slide presentation, we perhaps could take a few questions, and also then, of course, look forward to about 30 minutes of Q&A time. Panel, thank you so much for your preparation. This has been a long time coming. So I would like to invite you guys to agree to disagree and try and get the most out of our conversation today. At the end, ladies and gentlemen, I will be summarizing the key takeaways and, of course, thanking each and every one of you for being here. But before we kickstart, I'd like to pose this question to our panel. According to the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, he says, tourism in itself is one of the wonders of the world. I would like to ask you panelists, what has been your, as they say in French, raison d'etre for doing this or being in this sector or industry, Javier?
Okay, I'm first in line. Good morning, everybody. That's a difficult question. In my case, I've been in the market intelligence department of UNWTO for 10 years now. I have a passion for data, for evidence-based reasoning and policy making. So pretty much the opportunity to be able to analyze tourism from a statistical point of view is what is the reason why I am in tourism. And it's a pleasure to be able to work in this sector. A lot of things need to be done. There's still a lot of data gaps. I'm sure my colleagues here on the panel are well aware of that. Data collection is still an important challenge for the sector, but there is a lot of information out there on arrivals, on receipts, on expenditure. on length of stay, on tourism, GDP, etc. But the ongoing challenge for a researcher in tourism is to be able to collect more data and to interpret it better.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for inviting me. My background is in hospitality management, hotel management, but generally I think the tourism industry is a positive industry. We saw this morning there's definitely challenges that we need to overcome, but I think it's a collaborative industry. Although, as Javier said, also there are challenges of siloed approaches between different travel sectors, but I think overall it's a positive sector. It's bringing people closer together. It's educating people about different cultures, different societies, different environments, and that's why I love working in the industry. And even though it's a global industry, I think it's a pretty small and close-knit sector as well, where a lot of people know each other, as you can see here in the room today as well, which is great. And I think it's a positive industry to work in, especially looking at the future.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My background is in sustainability. I work in sustainable tourism, and the reason I decided to go down that path and start a tourism degree was really because I love traveling. I was really drawn to that industry, and I was raised to believe that if you work in a field that you enjoy, that you love, then you'll do much better and you're also happier. So I took that advice and decided to focus on sustainability because I really wanted to contribute to helping that industry reduce its negative impact on the environment and help drive more holistic outcomes that we can achieve through the tourism industry.
Thank you. Dr. Ian.
Hello, my name's Ian Yeoman. My field of research is tourism futures, and the reason I'm in this because it's the only area of research where you can make it up. It's the only field of research where it's all about Star Trek, climate change, disasters, and all of those horrible, gory things. Because one of the things about futures work is it's the only place where you'll be traveling to, because nobody can change the past. You can't go back. So it's all about fun and creativity.
Nice. Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi. I'm Yin Mei from Malaysia Airlines. I think being in the tourism industry, we all know here, we're all part of tourism, right? You know, we know that we are the highly resilient people, or rather the most resilient people, if you can call it. I think tourism is an ecosystem that has a lot of collaboration amongst different people, different partners and so on. And I think that is what enriches, and that's what makes tourism even more exciting than it is already. And as what we from the airline has always said, there's never a dull day in aviation. Yeah, so I think if you want to be excited about your career, it is clearly in tourism.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is your panel for today. Please give them a round of applause. Fun, creative, and exciting. So I invite you and our panelists all to start on that note. Let's first kick off by taking a look at international tourism trends and outlook. Now, this particular presentation will set the tone and scene for our session today to give us an overview of what tourism looks like at this point, post-pandemic, and of course, looking towards the future as well. According to the latest UNWTO World Tourism Barometer, international tourist arrivals almost tripled in January to July this year. That's a surge of 172% compared to the same period last year in 2021. This means the sector recovered almost 60% of pre-pandemic levels. Our speaker for this first presentation is Mr. Javier Ruscas, Senior Program Officer, the Tourism Market Intelligence and Competitiveness Department at UNWTO. Mr. Javier, the stage is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Hope hope you can hear me. It's a pleasure to be in Kota Kinabalu, my first time in Malaysia and Borneo. Already a pleasure to enjoy this Malaysian hospitality, and let me dedicate my first words to thank the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture of Malaysia, and also the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Environment of Sabah for having us and for organizing the 6th edition of WTC. So my presentation is basically the latest results of the World Tourism Barometer. Jesse, our moderator, has just mentioned it. The slides you're going to see now are basically, if I can get them to advance.
Get some help with the, okay, there you go.
There we go. These slides show some of the latest results in international tourism. This first slide shows the evolution of international tourist arrivals. When we talk about international tourist arrivals, we mean overnight visitors. From the year 2000 up until the year 2019, sorry. So you see the peak there of 1,466 million arrivals just before the pandemic, so 1.5 billion international tourists that year. Then with the pandemic, that happened. So there was a huge decline, 72% drop in international tourist arrivals in the year 2020. Small uptick in 2021, but still remaining 70% below 2019 levels. So very two challenging years. And now in 2022, finally, we've seen a slight recovery, quite encouraging actually. We'll probably end the year at minus 35%, as you can see there in your screen. So we've gone from minus 70% in 2021 to minus 35%. That means that in the year 2022, we will probably have recovered 50% of the loss of the last year in international tourism. In the next slide, you will see a green light. The green line represents the international tourism receipts. So there you go. Pretty similar trend as in international tourist arrivals, with a few small interruptions in growth, but basically a similar pattern. Receipts grew to 1.5 trillion in the year 2019. So if you think about it, 1.5 trillion receipts, 1.5 billion with a B arrivals. In other words, spending per trip is on average $1,000, or it was before the pandemic, and we'll see that in a minute. That has actually increased in the last years or so. The year 2022 will probably end at around 20 to 30% below 2019 levels, so pretty fast recovery in terms of international tourism receipts. Receipts, by the way, is the earnings of destinations. It doesn't include the passenger transport receipts, just what the visitors spend in the destinations. So some of the shocks or crises that we've seen in the tourism sector, at least the most important ones that have affected international tourism globally, were SARS in the year 2003, the global economic and financial crisis in 2009, and then the pandemic in 2022. Before the pandemic, the biggest crisis was the global economic and financial crisis, with a 4% decline in arrivals. Nothing compared to the 72% that we've seen in the pandemic. This graph shows the similar information, but on a month-by-month basis. So in those 12 bars that you see on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the monthly change in international tourist arrivals compared to the same month in 2019. A big drop when the pandemic broke out in March with practically no international travel. You see there 90% decline in April, May, and June. And overall, 72%. So that I mentioned before. 2021, similar pattern, but slightly more encouraging results. In the summer season, Northern Hemisphere summer season, you see that the arrivals actually increased a little. In 2020, we were in the minus 70s. In 2021, we were in the minus 50s. So a progressive improvement in the data. The year ended with minus 70% over 2019, but a very encouraging 9% increase over the year 2020, the previous year. 2022, the data we have up until now, and Jesse mentioned January to July. Now we have data from January to September. My colleague Harry Wang, Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, actually mentioned that in his welcome remarks before. We've seen a 37% decline. And what's interesting is the progression. the sustained and pretty rapid recovery from January to July of this year. We've gone from -64 in January to -24. And I'm highlighting the data for July, -24, because it's actually the best month since the start of the pandemic. With August then seeing a slight softening of the recovery with -25 and -27. So we're at -37% right now compared to 2019, and we'll probably end the year around -35%. The following graph has the same information, but it's a line graph, not a bar graph, because that allows us to compare between some regions. So that's the blue line is the world data, and here you have in green the data for Europe. So Europe was one of the best not one of the best performing region in the world, and you can see why. The green line clearly exceeds the trend of the general, blue line, the world trend. And this year, 2022, in the first 9 months, international tourism in Europe has actually reached 80% of pre-pandemic levels. So the world has reached 63%. Europe has actually reached 80%. So quite encouraging data from that part of the world. In Asia, because of the more restrictive policies and stricter travel restrictions, you'll see in that slide with the orange line that it's still lagging behind, so -83% still in the first 9 months of 2022, but very encouraging signs in some destinations and source markets, which are gradually opening up now since this summer, approximately August and September, we've seen a number of countries opening up. So you see that yellow line starting to grow, and hopefully in the year 2023, we'll see some very good results in this part of the world. In this slide, I wanted to compare Asia and the Pacific, which is the yellow line, with Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia in 2022 has actually outperformed the Asian average, and that's a good sign also. Within Asia, actually the best results were seen in South Asia, in Oceania, in Southeast Asia, and then probably the sub-region which is lagging more behind is Northeast Asia. This is just a map to show you the regional classification that we have at UNWTO. As you can see, the Middle East there includes 2 countries in the north of Africa, Libya and Egypt. And you can see the results of the different regions for 2021 and the first 9 months of 2022. You'll probably see it better in this other slide where we compare the different regions. So dark blue is the international tourism change of 2020, light blue is 2021, and the red bar is the first 9 months of 2022. So -37% for the world, -19% for Europe, which I just mentioned before. Asia Pacific is still lagging a little bit behind with -83. The Americas, -34. Africa, -37. And the Middle East, which is quite surprising, -23. So it's the second best performing region so far in the first 9 months of the year. And that's mostly due to the very good results in Saudi Arabia, especially July and September, where there's been huge increase in visitor numbers because of the Hajj pilgrimage and the Umrah pilgrimage. So that's really boosted the average for the Middle East for the first few months, first 9 months of the Middle East. How much of international tourism has been recovered so far? So you can see there for Europe, 81%. I mentioned that before. For the Middle East, 77%. The Americas, 66%. Africa and the world average are both 63%, and then Asia Pacific still on that way to recovery, still a little bit lagging behind. So this shows a pretty optimistic, I would say, X-ray or scenario of the current situation and where we are heading into 2023. In this graph, we show the same information, except it's not percentage growth, but volume. So total millions of international tourist arrivals from January to December. This yellow line is for the year 2019, so just before the pandemic, and you see the peak there in July and August with over 160 million international tourist arrivals in those northern hemisphere summer months. What happened in 2020? That happened. The blue line is the international tourist arrivals from January to December of 2020. You see the big decline with only 40-something million arrivals in the month of August. 2021, in the red line, you see a small recovery. It started out quite weak in January, March, as you can see there, but then in the summer months, it started to recover. And now the green line is the data for January, September. So we're on our way to recovering those 2019 levels with a similar pattern, the seasonality. This graph is also interesting to see the seasonality, not just for the world, but for the regions. So this is the same graph, but for Europe. The green line there, very close to the yellow line, which represents the pre-pandemic levels. Asia Pacific still on its way to recovery, a bit longer way to go. The Americas, Africa, and the Middle East. Interesting about the Middle East is that it's the only region where international tourism has actually reached the levels of 2019. Specifically in the month of July, you can see there that the green line actually touches the yellow line in the month of July and also in the month of September because of these very two strong months that I mentioned before, especially fueled by the data in Saudi Arabia. So what are the best performing destinations so far? The ones in red are in the Americas, the ones in blue are in Europe. So you see a combination of different countries around the world. Basically, some Caribbean destinations have performed quite well. Some of the islands have exceeded already pre-pandemic levels, like St. Martin, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and also some small destinations in Europe like Albania and Andorra. In Asia, the Maldives is doing very well so far with arrivals just 5% short of pre-pandemic levels. This is according to data that we have for the first 9 months. So there might be better performing destinations which are not in this graph because they haven't published the data yet or it hasn't been communicated. The following graph has the same information, but not in terms of passenger trips, not in terms of trips, but in terms of earnings, in terms of international tourism receipts. You see there some 5 very strong European destinations, Serbia, Turkey, Romania, with earnings in the first 9 months of 2022 by far exceeding the earnings of 2019. In Asia, there's Pakistan. In Africa, you have Morocco, which is doing quite well in the first 9 months. And then you have a combination of European, African, and one Middle Eastern country, which is Jordan, in this list of best performing destinations. This graph shows the evolution of the UNWTO Confidence Index. What's the Confidence Index? It's an index that we prepare at the Market Intelligence Department at UNWTO, which tracks the confidence levels, the sentiment of tourism experts around the world. So the blue line is the evaluation of the past 4 months, and the red line is future prospects, the next 4 months. So what's interesting here is that for 2022, for T3 is the period from September to December, there's a slight dip in confidence levels for the last 4 months of the year. And this is because of the economic challenges kicking in, the concerns about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the concerns about inflation, high oil prices, and other headwinds that are starting to kick in and will actually affect the tourism sector probably in the early months of next year. What are the factors, talking of headwinds, what are the factors which might impact tourism next year? We asked our UNWTO panel of experts, and these are the factors that were pointed out by them. So 82% of the people surveyed referred to the economic environment. So inflation, slowdown in economic growth, monetary tightening, the specific instrument used by central banks to control inflation, which is the interest rates. Unfortunately, it is also one of the headwinds for the recovery of tourism because it impacts demand. So unfortunately, these are the two main concerns. So economic environment and higher transport and accommodation costs, which is linked to inflation. Other factors include the travel restrictions, especially in a region where we are now in Asia, and the uncertainty from the Russian offensive in Ukraine are also important factors. There's other factors like airport congestion, staff shortages, and the ongoing pandemic and uneven vaccination were also quoted as important factors. This graph shows similar information that I mentioned before, but it tells you where we come from in terms of predicting what's going to happen in the last few months of 2022. So the blue line is the data that I've already mentioned, actual data, monthly change in international tourist arrivals. And back in March, we drew two scenarios for the remaining of the year. A green dotted line represents scenario number 1, more positive scenario, and the orange line represents a more pessimistic scenario that we did in March this year, where we thought, okay, this is a more downward scenario in case the economic environment or other factors impact tourism demand more strongly. The fact is we're somewhere in between, which is that blue line there, somewhere within both scenarios, and we'll probably end the year at minus 35%, as you can see there in the lower right-hand side of the screen. Interesting reflection here. This graph shows the tourism towards 2030 projection that we did back in 2010. So please note, this long-term projection is no longer valid. This was done before the pandemic. So this 2030 projection of 1.8 billion tourists is no longer valid, but it's an interesting graph to showcase where we are in terms of that forward-looking exercise that we did back then. Back then, we thought we would have 1.4 billion international tourists in 2020. In fact, growth was slightly faster than we predicted, and you can see the blue line there outpacing our long-term forecast. So in fact, we reached almost 1.5 billion in the year 2019. Then we had the pandemic with a 72% decline, and then the possible recovery this year, probably over 900 million international tourists by the end of the year. So it's interesting, we're actually about 0.5 billion away from the originally projected figure of 1.5 billion international tourists for the year 2022. So sometime next year we will revisit this long-term forecast to see what's the situation after this big crisis that we've just undergone. When will we actually recover 2019 levels? Well, here we asked our UNWTO panel of experts, and you see that 27% of tourism experts around the world, this is based on a sample of tourism experts from all world regions, about 300 experts, 27% think that the recovery will take place next year in 2023. But actually, when we did this survey back in May, this percentage was 48%. So there's been a slightly more pessimistic change in the mindset of tourism experts. Now it's 27%. And about 40% think that the recovery of pre-pandemic levels will take place in 2024. 21% think it'll be in 2025 or later. Many of those are actually Asian experts, and rightly so, because the tourism sector is still recovering. This is the same data for different regions. I won't go into that, but basically Middle Eastern, African, and European experts are the most optimistic. In terms of change in consumer trends, because it's not so much about reaching pre-pandemic levels, but the changing of the mindset of the tourist and the tourism destinations, and the presenters earlier this morning have actually mentioned it. It's a question of sustainability. It's a question of protecting the environment, protecting local heritage, not just from the point of view of the tourists, but also the DMOs, the NTOs. But we've already seen a change in the mindset of the traveler. One of the things we've seen is interest in traveling closer to home. People tend to travel closer. Travelers go for staycations, which has actually driven domestic tourism. In the early months of the pandemic in 2020, domestic tourism is actually what saved the day in many countries. Without the possibility of crossing frontiers, without the possibility of traveling internationally, the tourism sector, quote unquote, survived in those early months thanks to domestic tourism. And domestic tourism is a very important part of our sector. It shouldn't be overseen. We tend to look more international tourism. We do so in the Market Intelligence Department. Countries do so because of the earnings, the export revenues that it generates, but domestic tourism is also a very important part of the tourism sector. In a report we did in 2021, we calculated that there's actually 9 billion domestic trips per year, at least before the pandemic. So that's 6 times as many trips done internationally. So it's about 1.5 billion international trips before the pandemic, 9 billion domestic trips. So an important segment of the tourism sector that needs to be looked at carefully. Another change in consumer trend, interest for rural tourism, road trips, nature-based tourism, more responsible travel, and this is what I just mentioned before, the interest for sustainability. The keynote speaker earlier this morning mentioned it, economic, social, and environmental. It's important to limit, first to measure, and second to limit the impact of tourists on the destination. And that means local heritage, that means environment, that means nature, that means wildlife, cultural, both tangible and intangible, not just because we deserve, we need to protect this for future generations, but because the tourism sector, to a large degree, depends on it for attracting tourists. So this is one of the important mindsets that we have to have looking into the future. Another change we've seen, longer stays and higher spending. During the pandemic, we've seen increased stays. If the average length of stay, we're actually studying this in the Market Intelligence Department right now, we still don't have a figure, but roughly it's between 5 or 6 days. That's the average length of stay. This has actually increased by 1 or 2 days during the pandemic, which has led to higher spending per trip. In the following graph, actually, I'll show you how much this has increased. Before the pandemic, and I mentioned this before, the average spending per trip was about $1,000. In 2020, this grew to $1,370 on average for the world. That's about a 30% increase, both in nominal and real terms. And in 2021, it's increased even more to 1,420. Actually, it's increased even more in current terms, but in real terms, it's about the same, 31%. So that 10 percentage point difference between the nominal growth and the real growth, so from 40 to 31, that 9% or 10% point difference is actually inflation. So inflation started to kick in last year, even before the war in Ukraine. So that's one of the reasons also why the spending per trip, the average spending per trip has actually increased. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm finishing quickly.
Okay, how many slides do you have?
Just a few more.
Okay,
I'll be 1 minute and I'll finish. Just run through, inflation is high, we already know this. Oil prices are high, and related to oil prices and inflation, of course, the higher transport and accommodation costs, which is one of the big challenges for next year. But talking of oil, one of the challenges that we have in the tourism sector, of course, is decarbonization and how to make our tourism sector greener. So just quickly mention the Glasgow Declaration. I don't know if many people here are familiar with this climate action in tourism. It was signed in 2021 to accelerate climate action. It aims to secure commitments to support the global goals to cut emissions by 50% over the next decade and reach net zero before 2050. It was launched in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change last year at COP26 to support the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and it's been signed by about 700 institutions so far. It consists of 5 pathways, the main being measure. So in order to implement these changes, we need to measure, collect data to see how this is evolving. Decarbonize, set and deliver targets aligned to reduced emissions that we can measure again. Regenerate, restore and protect ecosystems, supporting nature's ability to draw down carbon. And collaborate, so NTOs, the private sector, governments need to collaborate to implement this. This can't just be done by governments. It just can't be done by businesses alone. It has to be a public-private partnership. Everybody has to collaborate. And finally, we need some funding for this also. It's important to finance this transition. So I will end with that. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy. And thank you very much.
Mr. Javier Rusca, Senior Program Officer at UNWTO. Thank you very much for that presentation. I had a few questions, but I think in the interest of time, we will move along as market intelligence is. It is, of course, data heavy. I was hoping to ask you about 2023 in terms of what that immediate forecast may look like, considering that you said it will be in recovery phase mostly. And 2024 is when we will really bounce back. But we'll keep that question for the end. Also, a quick reminder that slido.com is a site you can access on your phone and key in the code WTC 2022, and you can post your questions for our panel here. Ladies and gentlemen, we swiftly move along. As we know, tourism is one of the world's largest economic sectors, and travel and tourism is among the fastest growing industries. It accounts for more than 10% of global GDP. What we want to look at today is the representing forces that will shape the future of tourism, also scrutinizing the global mega trends and scenarios for future asset formation in tourism. I've come across this term called bleisure, which is business, a mix of pleasure, travel and tourism. There's also alternatives like solo traveling and travelers who are looking for more healthy and organic experiences. Also those who crave for tech-empowered travel and also perhaps even space tourism in the near future. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please help me welcome for his presentation Dr. Wouter Geerts, Senior Research Analyst of SCIFT.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for your Malaysian hospitality so far. Very much enjoy being in this part of the world. So, tourism in transition is what I'm going to talk about a little bit. In interest of time, I'm not going to touch on all of the points you mentioned, but I will talk a little bit about sort of the new consumer and what that means. Just for those of you who are not aware of SCIFT and SCIFT Research, we're a group of journalists and researchers. We investigate the travel industry completely independently. We write about this in articles and reports that provide a lot of data-driven and in-depth insights into what's happening in the travel industry. So I want to start off with a little statement today, and that is that the travel industry has never been more relevant than it is today. I think everyone in this room probably knows how relevant the tourism sector is. It took the world pretty much a complete stop of tourism to realize how important our industry is to our economies, to our societies, to our personal fulfillment, to how we work, how we live, how we socialize. And it's great to see things coming back to how they were before the pandemic. It's been a crazy couple of years, right? Within basically a year, we went from completely empty airports, no planes or ghost planes flying around the world, to this. Queuing outside of the airport. This is actually my home airport, Amsterdam in the Netherlands. People are queuing outside of the airport for 4 hours to even get into the airport and through security, because there are labor shortages and there is massive pent-up demand. Everyone wants to travel at the moment. This is what recovery looks like in Europe and in North America, and hopefully it'll be coming here as well, although I hope you can manage it better than they do in Europe. So before the pandemic, we used to talk a lot about how travel is moving east, how the epicenter of travel and tourism is moving to Asia Pacific. It's moving away from North America, it's moving away from Europe, and it's moving to Asia Pacific. The volumes of travel that we're seeing in Asia and growth that we're seeing in Asia was largest in Asia Pacific. We're seeing that the pandemic has reversed that a little bit. As you can see on the screen now, in 2019, 9 out of the top 10 airline routes were in Asia Pacific. Today, it's only 1. Things have shifted back to the West, but that doesn't mean that that won't change over time. At SCIFT Research, we have been working with something like 20 different data partners. We've been tracking how the performance of 22 countries in the world in the travel industry in 22 countries worldwide are doing. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been doing this. We're comparing how the travel industry and different sectors within it are performing compared to 2019. And as you can see, Asia Pacific is pretty much a year behind the rest of the world. Where Asia Pacific, the black line represents 2022, is now at around 70% of 2019 demand and performance levels. That's pretty much where all the other regions were last year. And Asia Pacific didn't see much growth at all last year and has only really started since the beginning of this year. So there's still a lot of growth to be had in this region, whereas every other region is pretty much back to pre-pandemic levels with some swings and roundabouts. Asia Pacific still has some growth to come. Obviously the big problem here, the elephant in the room, is China. China is so important as a source market to all Asian countries. And at the moment, China is completely shut. There's pretty much no outbound travel happening from China. Domestic travel has recovered pretty well. International travel is non-existent. And while there are protests and there's unrest and there's talk of a more dynamic zero COVID policy, I think it's fair to say that there is a lot of uncertainty of when China will open and what that will look like and how the Chinese travelers will come back. So I personally and my team don't expect 2023 to be a complete return of the Chinese traveler yet. And so how do you as an industry and as countries in Asia Pacific respond to that? Now I don't want to be a massive downer and just talk about the negatives of Asia Pacific. What we have been seeing in the index is actually that a lot of countries have been performing very well. All other Asian countries, except for China and as an extension Hong Kong, because they're so reliant on Chinese travelers, have actually seen a lot of growth in the last couple of months in their performance. India is a standout performer here, performing better than they did in 2019, but all other countries as well have seen some significant growth and are very much on the path to recovery. And obviously long-term prospects remain very positive. IATA, the airline association, believes that Asia Pacific will see the largest growth in passenger volumes over the next couple of decades. That hasn't changed. Sure, now at the moment Asia Pacific isn't back to where it used to be, but there's still a lot of growth opportunities there. And when we're actually looking at emerging Asian countries and we take out China, we can see where the growth potential is in value as well. A Chinese traveler on average spends about $1,800 per trip. That's about the same as someone from a developed Asian country or from North America. If we can pull up other emerging Asian countries to that level, you can see the growth potential that is to be had there, and you can see how countries in Asia might be able to be less dependent on the Chinese traveler moving forward. Now, obviously, things are coming back, but things aren't coming back the same way that they were before the pandemic. And I want to touch on what we just heard, a lot of different types of travel and how all of this is being impacted. I want to talk about two sort of types of travelers, if you like, that will probably have a larger impact on the travel industry moving forward. And that's the blended traveler and the conscious traveler. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those two. So the blended traveler, also called bleisure, as you heard, it's a blend between business and leisure. And this is something that we are seeing as having a major impact on how the industry is coming back. A lot of people here today maybe, at least from our studies that we're doing in Europe and in North America, are working from home. This wasn't the case before the pandemic. A lot of people have started working from home and at least still partially work from home the majority of their time. This won't necessarily change completely, and therefore people have more flexibility. And what we find in our studies is that this is positive for the travel industry because people are taking more short trips and they're taking longer extended trips when they can. So this is a positive development for the travel industry that travel players need to be aware of. It means that business travel will change its nature. What business travel is will change. Here you can see on the left, the amount of business trips that contain a weekend has increased significantly during the pandemic. And at the same time, leisure travelers are more often taking their laptop during their trips so that they can extend their trip by doing some work. All of this provides many opportunities for the industry. And companies need to understand how to respond to this. And I think Airbnb is a great example here. We had Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky on our stage at our own Skift forum. And he said during the pandemic, 40% of people that came to Airbnb's website had no destination or date range in mind. 40%, that's mind-boggling. Go to any travel website. The first thing you see is a box which asks you for your destination and what dates you want to travel. Airbnb changed that because they realized there is an opportunity here. So if you don't know exactly your destination, they'll provide you with inspiration and they'll tell you where you might want to go. If you don't know which dates exactly, you can say you're flexible. And they will provide you with supply and push you towards where they have supply. So it's very beneficial to them as well. It's becoming more of an inspiration platform, and location is becoming less agnostic, where people can really stay and work wherever they want. So they can stay in tree houses or crazy other types of accommodation which Airbnb is pushing. Now it also means that the hospitality industry, the hotel industry and short-term rental industries are changing as well. So what we're seeing is that people don't necessarily stay in hotels when they're on a business trip or in rentals or on a campsite when they're on a leisure trip. This is all blending into one another or merging, if you like. And so we're seeing a company like Sonder, which is a short-term rental provider, more and more offering hotel-like services. At the same time, we're seeing Marriott, obviously a major hotel operator, starting to move into short-term rentals with its Homes and Villas brand. They just last week, I believe, also launched an apartments brand. And so they're actually moving into the short-term rental sector because they understand that their customers don't always want to stay in a Marriott hotel. They might want to stay in a rental with their family as well. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the conscious traveler. Sustainability, we've heard it already a lot, and I know that some of my speakers who are much more qualified to do so will talk more about sustainability as well. But I just want to give you my honest opinion on where we are in terms of sustainability. So it's a big problem, right? Sustainability is a big beast to grasp. It's hard to know where to start, where to go, how to make plans. All the plans that are being made are decades in the future. And so what are you going to do now? I feel that one of the major issues that the travel industry today is facing and is dealing with is that there is an attitude-behavior gap, or a say-do gap, where consumers say that they want more sustainability, and they're willing to pay for it. But when push comes to shove, they're not actually doing it. This is a study by Lufthansa and Hopper, which showed that 78% of people said that they want more sustainable options. 73% said they're willing to pay more for those options. But when they were actually offered a carbon offset on their flight, only 1% of people actually paid for that. This is a major issue that the industry needs to solve. So maybe if we're realistic today, sustainability is still a niche product. That's not to say that niche products can't be profitable and can't be successful. Just look at Louis Vuitton bags, for example. That company is doing pretty well. But at the same time, I think what we're looking at here is a leading indicator. Every survey we do says that people want more sustainability, but they're not actually paying for it just yet. That doesn't mean that it won't come. It's a leading indicator of what might happen in the future. And so travel companies need to start thinking about this now if they're not already. Now, aviation obviously is a big problem. I personally feel that the aviation industry is focusing a lot on technologies that don't exist yet, like electric planes, which won't be in existence and commercially viable for at least another decade. Sustainable aviation fuel, which makes up less than 0.1%, I believe, of all fuel used today, and has no capacity to grow anywhere near the volumes we need. Or carbon offsetting, pushing the buck on the consumer to pay extra for it. These aren't really major solutions. Efficiencies are being made by airlines all the time. And you can see that on the black line. Sure, emissions per kilometer flown have gone down. But we should be looking at the blue line, that total emissions continue to rise and rise. And this is where the problem lies, which the industry doesn't really talk about too much, and we should. We need to really start thinking about how can we actually find ways to reduce our total emissions. Same happens in the hotel industry. I don't want to just pick on the airlines. IHG, for example, on the left, this is how they report their carbon emissions. Kilograms of CO2 per occupied room has been going down every year. Great. They don't tell you that total emissions from IHG have actually gone up because they're a growing company. And so how are they going to get to their 2030 target if their emissions continue to go up? We don't really know. There's issues here that need to be talked about. And just saying that sustainability is important and that we're doing something as an industry is not enough. And I think, therefore, maybe we need to start thinking a little bit outside the box. The travel industry is so inherently linked with volume and emissions. The more volume we have, the more emissions we have. How are we going to break that? One thing, loyalty programs. They encourage you to travel more and more and more to achieve status. We've done some research and found that the average top-tier status level you would have to burn between 26 and 15 tons of carbon, depending on whether you mostly travel domestic or international. We heard this morning in the keynote that I believe it was 8 tons of carbon that the average Malaysian burns through all of their activities. The average global is 4.6. So as you can see, aviation is not a very sustainable industry. And therefore, maybe airlines need to start thinking outside the box of how can we promote sustainability and how can we encourage and thank our loyal customers without having to emit carbon. These are questions that need to be asked. So just to wrap up, 3 points that I think are important for you as a destination or as a tourism operator to take back to your team and when you go back after this conference. Firstly, I think we've all seen now that growth is not a given. It's very important for you to know how you're going to deal with future crises. Are you in a better place today than you were in 2020 when the pandemic hit? Do you know what to do when something happens? We've got major issues in China, unrest in the South China Sea. There's talk about inflation, recessions. This is not the final pandemic. There might be new variants from COVID. So what are you going to do when something happens next time? Second, as I showed, traveler demands and expectations have changed during the pandemic, and we believe that some of these will be lasting and won't go back to how they were before the pandemic. So have you identified new business opportunities? Have you identified new ways of innovation to attract these new consumers and to market to them? If you haven't yet, now is probably the time to do that. And finally, I think it's time to start adapting. We need, as an industry, to think about how we can make sustainability stick more with the consumer, how we can make them see and actually understand what they need to do to make this industry more sustainable. And as as corporates and as operators and as governments, we need to make sure that we lead the way. And for that, we probably need to think outside the box. So that was me. Here's a little QR code from a free report that we just launched a couple of weeks ago. It's called The State of Travel. A lot of the insights from today's presentation are in there, plus a ton more. Every industry, every sector within the travel industry is pretty much covered. So please go and download that. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Wuta. There you have it. Movements and, of course, also insights onto gaps that need to be addressed and a breach from inflation to recession. Thinking outside the box will guarantee new ways for you to extend your service. It's not all doom and gloom, ladies and gentlemen. The operative word, I think, during this conference has been sustainability so far, and perhaps it will be for the few years to come as we get our act together. Now, the Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, target number 8.9 aims to, by the year 2030, devise and implement policies to promote sustainable tourism that creates jobs and also promotes local culture and products. The importance of sustainable tourism has also been highlighted in SDG target number 12. But tourism often puts pressure on natural resources through overconsumption. It also puts enormous stress on on the locals and the use of the local land, which can lead to things like soil erosion, increased pollution, natural habitat loss, and more pressure on endangered species. But to give us the insights on her findings, please help me welcome our expert on sustainability today, Dr. Johanna Ler, postdoctoral research fellow at Griffith University, Australia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Hello, and again, really pleased to be here. This is my first time to Sabah, and I'm really encouraged to learn about the great sustainability initiatives and the importance that is placed on the unique natural resources that you have here. So, yeah, really great to learn, and I might be preaching to the converted. So with my talk today, I want to focus on the importance sustainability provides in helping tourism shape a better future. I will start off by introducing 4 different tourism futures and the implications they provide for sustainability, and then move on to talking about several pathways of how we may be able to address some of the shortcomings of the pre-COVID tourism system. We don't have to talk about the devastating impacts the pandemic had. I think a lot of communities, a lot of decision makers, a lot of us use this time to reflect and perhaps realize that tourism was not so sustainable and resilient as we previously thought it to be. There has been a lot of talk today about this opportunity we now have to build back better, more resilient and greener. And I would actually like to go a step further and say we have a responsibility to ensure that all the money, all the effort, all the resources spent on tourism recovery and post-COVID tourism initiatives actually take the hard lessons we've learned over the past 2 years into account, and also consider and address the challenges that we know lie ahead. So on the basis of this, I will present some findings of work I completed with my colleague, Professor Susanne Becken. This report and this work was commissioned and is publicly made available by the Asian Development Bank. The 4 tourism futures I want to talk about are informed by work by the Forum of the Future, and we developed them based on an analysis of tourism COVID response strategies and policies. So the first potential future is that of discipline. And the goal for the tourism system in this future is to maintain economic growth and globalization. This future is embedded within a capitalist paradigm. And in this future, tourism will return to its pre-COVID growth trajectory. This is achieved through digitalization and increased control to manage disruptions. Increased control and standards will improve transparency, but also reduce choice and diversity. The data-driven and machine-driven approach in this future will change how visitors interact with people and nature. As for some of the opportunities for tourism to deliver on sustainability outcomes, the use of new technologies and enforced standards will drive productivity and efficiency. However, as we have just seen on one of the slides on emissions, these gains will likely be outstripped by continuous growth in many areas, and therefore continuing to add pressure on natural resources. The second potential future is that of compete and retreat. And the goal for the system in this future is to maintain stability within countries. This future is dominated by a focus on national interest, tightly controlled borders, and investments will be made into self-sufficiency. In this future, governments will take greater control of tourism, either to grow domestic markets or diversify away from tourism altogether. And we have actually seen this happening quite a lot as part of COVID. In this future, supply chains will be localized, tourism products developed celebrating the unique sense of place, cultural identity strengthened, and carbon emissions will be reduced. There are also risks to sustainability or challenges associated with this future. A lack of exchange of data and knowledge between countries will lead to inefficiencies and inequalities, and there will also be labor market issues. The next future is the unsettled future, and really this future is defined by the continuous impacts of crises and disasters. Tourism in this future really isn't a priority for governments or citizens. An opportunity for tourism here lies to build on the adaptive capacity the sector already possesses. But of course, it will face many challenges, including high uncertainty, limited consumer confidence, and financial capacities. Any progress on meeting or progressing the Sustainable Development Goals will be very limited despite continuous environmental collapse. And looking at these images, they're all taken from recent news articles. You may ask whether or not we already find ourselves in such a future. There's certainly evidence that we're on a path or on a trajectory towards this future. The recently released emissions gap report by UNEP stresses that there's currently no credible pathway in place for the international community to meet the Paris goals, and taken all current as well as planned action into consideration will end up with a 2.4 to 2.8 degree increase in global warming by the end of the century, and the consequences of that would be detrimental. So finally, the fourth future is the transform future, and this future presents the largest shift in mindset and system. This future presents a sustainable, fair and equitable world, and is achieved by transitioning from extractive to more regenerative practices. It presents the biggest opportunity for tourism to drive broader sustainability outcomes and resilience. And a focus on thriving and well-being will help address other issues such as biophysical and mental health. Of course, there's also some challenges associated with this future. There's the risk of leaving vulnerable groups or countries relying on extractive resources behind, and there's likely going to be opposition to change. So you may wonder, where are we heading? Which of those futures is most likely, or which path are we on? The first future really represents a stabilization of the pre-COVID tourism system. It's a return to business as usual with a focus on continuous growth. The second future represents change at the margin, because here the system goal changes to maintaining national stability. And then the last two futures represent what we call a transformation of the system, because the system structure and the outcomes the system produce have significantly changed. The unsettled future is what we would describe as an uncontrolled or unplanned transformation. And that happens when a system passes a tipping point and then collapses. The transformed future, on the other hand, is what we could describe as deliberate transformation through the triggering of key levers. And I want to present some of those, or give you some suggestions in a moment. So this future is probably the most difficult to achieve. And before I go on to talk about those pathways for change, I want to stop and make 2 points. The first one being that you perhaps noticed that sustainability really doesn't present just one future or one option, but it provides opportunities for tourism in each of those futures. The second point is more a reminder that every decision, every action we're taking today will lead us further down a path towards one of those or a different future. Of course, we face high uncertainty, but I hope that those scenarios or futures helped understand or highlight that sustainability will be important no matter what the future outcome will be. And therefore, it really presents a proactive and, you could say, no-regret approach to decision-making. So I want to use the last few minutes to present to you some pathways to help tourism transform, to help the sector build forward better, and address some of those challenges of the or shortcomings of the pre-COVID tourism system. We've got some levers for change for each of those pathways, and there's several actions that sit under each of those levers, but I'll just give a few examples due to limited time. So the first pathway is a value-led tourism model, and the first lever to achieve that pathway would be to focus on quality over quantity. That means really moving away from just focusing on visitor numbers to asking who are the visitors you actually want to attract. Are these people who stay longer? Are these people who spend more, or perhaps more meaningfully engage with the host community or have a lower carbon footprint? The second lever is to manage carrying capacities and then leveraging the uniqueness of place. And I believe that addressing those two levers will also help you attract your high value customers. Finally, we need to measure success in a more holistic way. And a really great example here is that of Planet Happiness. Planet Happiness work with several local governments in Australia and also the Department of Tourism in Vanuatu to engage host communities in a more qualitative discussion around well-being and how tourism may help achieve that. The next pathway is decarbonising tourism, and we've heard from previous speaker the importance to measure tourism's carbon footprint. That includes businesses, destinations, subsectors, and tourism as a whole. We need to understand that footprint in order to manage it and set meaningful targets. When we talk about setting targets, it's important to engage stakeholders at all levels so that they understand what their mandate is, what is their responsibility to act on those or achieve those targets. And that brings me to the point of increasing knowledge and carbon literacy and really capacity at all levels of decision making. An example, and you know, there's a lot of good resources out there already. It's really great that Decarbonisation has been mentioned quite a bit here, and the Glasgow Declaration, of course, as well, is another example, something from COP27 a bit more recently. The Tourism Panel on Climate Change was launched recently, and this science-based independent group of experts supported by the Sustainable Tourism Global Centre aims to produce or synthesize knowledge on tourism and climate change and adaptation, and develop indicators and then measure progress over the next 3 years through a series of reports. So the next pathway is tourism-led regeneration, and regeneration really means restoring or replenishing. And for tourism, that means to go beyond conserving and protecting what's already there and to minimizing harm, what sustainability often aims to achieve, and go beyond that to restoring ecosystems, for example, encourage cultural thriving, and promoting well-being. So it's really to giving back, repairing. I don't have a picture here, but a good example is the Te Aki Promise in New Zealand. It's a destination or visitor pledge that aims to align all tourism stakeholders with the priority of host communities. Next, we've got diversifying the visitor economy, and that includes markets. So again, perhaps focusing on closer to home, domestic markets, diversifying products, products that give back. A really good example for those of you interested is the work, the Untourist Guide in Amsterdam. They have developed really quite innovative tourist experience, and this is something that did not come out of COVID. It's actually a response to over-tourism that Amsterdam has experienced. Workforce diversification, so that includes not only looking at ensuring that we have people from a wide range of backgrounds, but also diversifying skills, and then economic diversity to help us reduce our reliance on only tourism or one type of tourism. Next, the fifth pathway is improving governance. The first lever here is the importance to ensure policies, tourism policies, integrated with policy of other sectors. And again, I've got a climate change example. It's actually really important because I feel like there is a gap. This isn't happening as much as it should be. We see that a lot of the goals and objectives of tourism policies don't necessarily align with goals and strategies of climate change or other environmental policies, and there's a risk that the different objectives actually contradict each other. Collaboration is the next lever. It was mentioned before, and I think that collaboration across sectors, governments, and businesses will help address perhaps the policy challenges as well. And finally, building adaptive management. So there's opportunities, for example, to foster strategic linkages between tourism and the humanitarian sector to build capacity in order to respond to disasters more effectively. And then finally, the last pathway is sustainable finance. And I'm not a finance expert, but there's some really important opportunities here. Seeking new revenue sources to implement some of those actions I've mentioned. There's a lot of options of how that might be done. Fiscal instruments such as carbon taxes for local governments, raising entry fees to national park, for example, or parking tickets. And of course, these can be supplemented by voluntary contributions by businesses or visitors. It's really important that green finance options are made available to smaller scale projects. And when governments hand out loans or grants, they really should attach some sustainability criteria to them to ensure that taxpayers' money is not, coming at the cost of sustainability. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Tara Makasi, and happy to take any questions or feedback or comments.
Thank you, Dr. Johanna. We've seen, data. We've seen the change and movement in consumer behavior. We've talked about the conscious traveler. But I think you've also touched on a point that into the future will be important about the well-being of the traveler. And of course, thanks for sharing those pathways as well. I'm sure everyone's question is, well, how do we adapt quickly? What are the low-hanging fruits? How do we swiftly move forward into the new year to guarantee some sort of traction in terms of travelers on location? Well, our next speaker will be sharing his insights on the case study. It's a country case study looking at a scenario. Professor of Tourism Futures from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand is Dr. Ian Yeoman. He is being called a professional crystal ball gazer. And also one that specializes in travel and tourism. Tourism destinations should align with wellness principles moving forward, but that must have a balance and order between environment, people, and communities. But there are also risks affecting the hospitality industry that are not only related to sustainability, as we've just seen and discussed, but also largely due to external factors like inflation and recession, war, and geopolitics. Dr. Ian Yeoman, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Keneketu, keneketu, keneketu. So, welcome. Hello. Hi. Hi. Good. So you're all still alive. That's good. So, what I'm going to talk about is New Zealand. Have you all heard of New Zealand? Good. All Blacks, rugby. Good, good, good. So, we even play cricket. What's cricket like in Malaysia? Good. Okay. So, I'm going to talk about what we did in the terms of what New Zealand's responses to the future and how we dealt with COVID-19, taking us towards the future. Okay, let's start. So, you all know who this is? Jacinda. So, 14th, around March 2020, this thing appeared called COVID-19, and it changed everybody's life. The one thing to remember was tourism, international tourism, is New Zealand's largest export earner, represents 19% of exports. You know, we have more tourists in the terms of revenue than we export in the terms of beef, sheep, milk powder, and we have a lot of sheep, and we have a lot of cows. So overnight, the strategy was, because COVID-19 was the biggest threat to the New Zealand economy that it ever faced, they decided to close international tourism. We just closed the doors. And that's a huge thing. Can you imagine? 11% of people that work in New Zealand, it's related to tourism. And international tourists are fundamentally, we need them. They're really important to the economy and to our well-being, and we just stopped an industry. And everybody knows the story of what happened. So this is our story and how we responded to that. Because we've just we reopened to tourism, international tourists, about 6 months ago. So you had a tourism industry that was in fundamental crisis. That just wasn't there. So this is what we did. So this is Kelvin Davis, the Minister of Tourism. And you've got to understand tourism policy and the future, you've got to understand who's leading that and your response to that. So Kelvin is a very caring person. His background is as a teacher. In New Zealand, we have a very small government. So Kelvin's not just the Minister of Tourism, he's also the Minister for Prisons, and he's also the Associate Minister for Education. So he's very compassionate, and he's a believer of, I need to improve society. It's all about the betterment of society. It's all about communities, because he comes from a background as a teacher from teaching underprivileged. And that's why he's in politics. So with COVID-19, so what he did with COVID-19 was he wanted to respond to reimagine the tourism industry in the terms of doing it. So they went very strongly down a regenerative tourism perspective. So you got the best thinkers in the world together on Zoom, and to think about what would be a better tourism industry in the terms of what it was all about. And after 6 months of doing things, the key stakeholders in the tourism industry, the big thinkers in the tourism industry, said we want a regenerative policy. We want to go down this area. And the 5 principles of the first report of the Tourism Task Force, that's what he set out, were all about for enrichment of people, for the enlivenment of identity, prosperity of the economy, health of the planet, and well-being. And right at the center of that was community tourism and also an indigenous tourism in the terms of Maori, in the terms of that. So that was the first stage. That's what he set out to do. This is our pathway. This is our utopia. This is our future. But politics is different. A year down the line, what happens? We get a new Minister of Tourism. What is the first thing that he does? Well, he says, thank you, Kelvin, and the Tourism Task Force. He closes that down. He closes down the Tourism Task Force because he fundamentally said it was too visionary, it was too airy-fairy, and industry wasn't responding to it. They weren't getting the buy-in the terms of, because we're facing a crisis now. So you've got to remember the Minister of Tourism, the new one that came in, Stuart Nash, you've got to understand him. He's the Minister of Tourism, but also the Minister for Economic Development and the Minister for Small Businesses. A more pragmatic approach to the future. So basically what we had to do was go back to the beginning, because it's all about politics and power in the terms of the story. We didn't get rid of everything that Kelvin had done. So what we did in the second phase of research and policy responses, we took a more pragmatic focus, and we asked the question in the terms of what would be tourism in the terms of transformation. More of a hands-on approach in things that industry could do and decisions industry could take. Not something very big in the terms of this is what we want the tourism industry to look like, but how do we transform an industry into something that's different? Still a focus on regeneration. So what it was all about was, what can we do, but what can you do? Because when you're doing policy and it's visionary and it's utopian, sometimes it's out there, but the connectivity with industry is not there. So you're asking the question, what can we do in the terms of leadership, but what can you do in the terms of contribution? This was all about design thinking and redesigning the industry, looking for potential solutions. This was problem and solution focused, but still transformational and regenerative. One of the things that we did not want was what we were in 2019 in the terms of what tourism is. Still a strong feeling of change is necessary, but it had to be more practical and linking. So what they did in the terms of transformation, there were a number of these, what we call ITP, transformational plans for a whole range of industries, agriculture, tourism, finance. It was all about trying to do something. So what we did was, we got rid of one task force, and then we had to start some sort of other task force, or different stakeholders, different leaders from industry. And we used what we call a framing questions perspective. Framing questions are, you're asking industry or asking the client, what are the most important issues that you have that will shape the future? So very specific questions. So we came up with 4 framing questions. What are the 4 important things that you want an answer to in the terms of, and how will that shape the future of tourism? So the first question we're asking, how will a volatile and changing world reshape New Zealand tourism? They all wanted to know what that was. This very rapid change of things that were going on. The other thing, because we're talking about Ukraine, we're talking about global economic recession, how will the future of wealth shape the future of New Zealand tourism? Because tourism is fundamentally about disposable income. It's all about high-value tourists, the middle classes. What economically, how will that change wealth and distribution patterns in the terms of other things? Other questions were, how do the planet's ecosystems align with human values? So again, a very strong focus on sustainability in the terms of doing things. And finally, is technology a substitute for labour supply, given the crisis that New Zealand was facing, like many other countries of the world? In order to answer these questions, because I'm a futurist, and one of the things about futurists is they all want to know what the answer is, but I never give you the answer. I always give you a range of options or scenarios in the terms of what we did. So working with the ITP, we decided to go down a very strong scenario planning perspective. And if you're talking about scenarios, scenarios are not forecasts of the future. They're stories about the future, the different alternatives. And what we did for that was we're using the work of Professor Jim Dayton's work, who's a professor of future studies and foresight at Hawaii University. And if you ever meet Jim, buy him, always buy him a beer. He's a really nice guy. He's 86 and he climbs mountains and keeps fit and does yoga and all stretchy classes. He's a really nice guy, 86. Anyway, his work is based upon the principles of plurality. And you're basically saying one future is about the collapse of the world. What would be the circumstances that would lead to the end of the world? He talks about growth in the terms of continuation. You know, what will tourism look like in 2030, 2040, economic perspectives? What's discipline? Discipline's all about the hard decisions you have to take in order to have an alternative future. And a transformation future is about utopia. It's your visioning. So we used Jim Dayton's work to frame what the future was, to answer these framing questions. So so we did this project-wise. So one of the first projects we started was because we were very interested in what is the future skill set you need for the future workforce. If this is the demand for tourism, what's labour supply going to like? So we asked the question, is technology a substitute for labour? And to ask that question, we used the scenario planning approach. I'm not going to go into the detail of all of what the scenarios are because I've only got 15 minutes. So in scenario 1, we looked at what will technology look like. And we overlaid that with demography projections and by cohort. And by doing this, you get what we call bipolar outcomes. So what is the future of technology? Is it something that's very dominant or is it passive? And from a population perspective, is there simply not enough workers, or do you have a very competitive labour market? And if you put all of this together, we got 4 scenarios. Scenario 1 was the day we just simply ran out of chefs. And that's probably a scenario which you can feel about today. You've got no chefs about. You've got no chefs, you just don't have a hospitality industry. Scenario 2 was about constrained capacity. Scenario 2 was about weekends only, in the terms of you can't be a tourism industry that was running at 100%. You can only run at 70%. Scenario 3 was, could we do that iRobot thing, that Robbie the robot? Could we use technology to completely replace the chef that was out there? And scenario 4 was more about the role of technology in entertainment. And this took you down, if you've seen, what's that famous film with Yul Brynner? I'm trying to think. Dum-diddy-dum-diddy-dum-dum-dum. Westworld. All seen the TV series Westworld? It's that Westworld theme park, you know, or that original series Westworld with Yul Brynner. So it's that world. So within each scenario, I'll just give you an example of one. If we looked at weekends only, what we talked about there was, what's the essence here? Basically, weekend only is a scenario where the tourism business's constant struggle for labour results in a smaller industry. So we're saying what happens if you're not what you were, your future's only 70% of what you are today. And how do you compete, and what does it look like? We talked about what would be the philosophy in this scenario in the terms of the application of technology. We looked at how technology could be a labour substitute and what could it do, how could we use it to enhance. But you're also looking for signals, because the big issue for New Zealand was our population is going to grow by 5 million in 2020. It's projected to be 6 million in 2040. But all of that increase is coming from the over 55s and the 60s. There's no growth hardly coming from young people. So, and fundamentally, the tourism and hospitality sector, from a labour supply perspective, is dominated by people that are under the age of 24. And there was hardly any growth from those from that cohort, even with immigration models. But all of the growth was coming from the over 55s. So basically, in the terms of response, because what the ITB did for each of the scenarios, responded with a number of decisions and examples of what would you do if you had this scenario in the terms of going forward. And an example of that was a structured pathway for apprenticeships from a part-time perspective for seniors. So how do you retrain the more older people to enter the hospitality and tourism industry because they've got lots of knowledge, they're very focused on SMEs, they're very entrepreneurial. How do you get that sector to work within tourism? So that's one example. The other scenario set was how do the planet's ecosystems align with human values? So again, sustainability regenerative tourism was really, really, really important. You all with me so far? If there's somebody snoring next door, just give them a little nudge. All right? Just give them a little nudge. All right? So I know what it's like, because there's me, then one more speaker that's keeping you from that beer or lunch. Okay, so how do the planet's ecosystems align with human values? And sustainability is really important. The reason we've got sustainability today is because of one issue, climate change. And we're not making effective decisions at the moment in order to mitigate or adapt for that future. Because 1.5 degrees, we might be able to do it. But we're probably going to work with 2.5 to 3.5. And that's really, 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 really serious. So don't underestimate it. So what we did with this scenario set, the two questions were, what are societal values towards sustainability? And what would the planet look like? So on one hand, it's all about societal values towards sustainability improving, or does it get worse? Do we not really care? And from an ecosystem perspective, the ecosystem's cured and contained, or it's just gradual decline, 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 decline. And that's what's happening at the moment. If you combine all those, we got 4 scenarios. Scenario 1 was just muddled along. And this is where you're doing something a little bit at a time, but it's not really getting any traction. And that's what environmental politics is all about. That's what's happening what happens with Glasgow and Egypt. You're trying to do something, but it's not getting any traction or any scale. And that's why tourism is facing a huge potential crisis. Scenario 2, imagine if it didn't work. Imagine if climate change was about 2.5 to 3 degrees. It's about total collapse. If Sabah, or anywhere in the belt, is all about nature, imagine if you didn't have that nature. Imagine if you ran out of water, you had extinction of the ecosystem. And it's really, really serious, but it's also very feasible. Scenario 4 is respect and generosity. This is the transformation. This is your utopian scenario. This is the scenario that anybody listen to the Spice Girls? You know who the Spice Girls are? Well, this is the scenario that you really, 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 really want. If you understand, this is what you need. This is your Spice Girl scenario. And scenario 3 is about sacrifice. Sacrifice is the hard decisions you have to take in order to get that scenario 4. Because to get a future where you've cured the environment, you have to compromise. You have to take really hard political decisions. So again, with all of these, extension, what happens if it's collapse? Collapse is a scenario where you can't make the right decisions. You can't get traction. And all of the goody things that we do in tourism, it's simply not good enough. And Joanne's colleague published a paper, it was on Twitter yesterday, Professor Suzanne Beckham, and basically Suzanne Beckham was saying Suzanne Beckon's a professor of sustainability at Griffith University. It's about basically you now need to take the hard decisions. It's about what are you going to do rather than talking about it. So this is a philosophy where the tourism industry does not, basically this is a tourism industry, you're asking the question, imagine a future for tourism here where it gets to the point where it's unsustainable. It's unsustainable. And you have to abandon a policy towards, you have to abandon an industry because climate change has fundamentally destroyed it. And there's a lot of evidence of this happening now. Because of conflict in Ukraine, inflation, nationalism, global debt, and economics, we're talking about developed economies developed economies can't help developing economies, if you know what I mean. We just can't throw enough resources at climate change because of some of the situations you've got now. So when we did the workshops with the tourism industries, some of the outputs were really, really bad, and it came to the point, from a policy response, if tourism's going to fail, what point in the future would you abandon a policy towards sustainability because you can't achieve anything? You can't achieve change. And that really woke a lot of people up. Do you really want to abandon sustainability? Because we've got this policy of doing it, but it's not going anywhere. It's not getting traction, and it's failing. So I think that's about 15 minutes. I could talk forever. I could talk forever about the future. I love it, and I love the Spice Girls as well. So basically what I'm trying to say is, when you're doing futures work, understand politics and power, because we had 2 different tourism ministers who had 2 different philosophies. And it was really complicated and frustrating. If you're going to do futures work, you need to be futures focused. What will the world look like in 2040? What will it look like in 2050? And you need to embed futures thinking into policy decisions. So if you take a decision, what is the impact? What are the constructs? What does this mean? Anyway, I'm ready for lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ian. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ian Yeoman, of course, a good question you've posted there. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. I think it's a point where we can stop to ask ourselves that. But while we look at the future, it is, if you will agree, it's also a top-down approach and a buy-in, bottom-up as well. So there's many hands at work here. And as you said, we'll need to start answering those questions now, even though we're planning for the future. In the near future, ladies and gentlemen, lunch will be served. It's good to see a hall almost full with just a few seats left. Do be reminded that slido.com will take your questions. We've already got a few questions coming in, and I can't wait for us to have the Q&A session in just a bit. But one other element as we look towards the future and as we address tourism and travel is the future of travel. And of course, Dr. Wuta, earlier you said, and I captured that, aviation is not the most ideal sustainable industry. So we'll debate that in a short while as well, as we look towards the topic of the future of mobility, understanding tomorrow's traveler. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Ms. Lau Yin Mei, Group Chief Marketing and Consumer Experience Officer, Malaysia Airlines.
Good afternoon. Selamat petang, everybody. Well, that's a good and bad of being the last panelist, right? The good is my fellow panelists have done so well. They've literally shared my whole deck. So that cuts my slides into just half of it. The bad side of it, obviously, I'm the only thing that stands between you guys and lunch, right? But the good thing of that then is that time is also shortened by half, because half my slides are done. So we are much nearer to lunch than you think we are. All right, so very clearly, very short, I'll just roughly go through what my fellow panelists have already shared. Yeah, the effects of pandemic, but I'll bring you very closer to the airline specific, and literally as what Javier has shared earlier, you have seen, against all the other crises prior to this that hit the airline industry, you have literally seen how SARS have done, you have seen how global recession, and even the 9/11. But what we couldn't foresee was really the impact of COVID, that literally plummeted the entire aviation industry overall. And within that, in Malaysia itself, you have seen the drop of immediate air travel, and clearly that drop has now not been recovered yet, as what we have seen with all the panelists. Very quickly, are we then now in recovery phase? What do you think? I think we are, right? You guys are traveling. Last year this time, probably half of us will be out. The other half of us are still caving in our own homes, right? So we are clearly recovering. Just some numbers that we would like to share. We have seen Latin America and North America recovering the fastest, almost back to pre-pandemic level. The global number is standing as of October, end of October, at 85%. Unfortunately, within Asia-Pac, we are only at 65%. Like what we have said prior to this, the speakers, purely driven primarily by China, which is still closed as we speak. Domestic recovered much earlier. I guess this doesn't really work, but never mind. Your attention to the top right, you see the lines there? Domestic recovery was much earlier. Yeah, even in China, it has already surpassed their pre-pandemic levels. And similarly for Malaysia, when we opened up our domestic borders last September, can I see a show of hands? Who literally couldn't wait to travel and started flying in September last year, domestically? And these are for Malaysians. Well, I did, right? Yeah. So revenge travel is real, right? And it's lovely to see now that you see the international lines it's coming up very quickly. If you look into where we foresee we will achieve a full recovery, of course, globally, we are looking at 2024. Unfortunately, within Asia-Pac, a more realistic is in 2025. Yeah? But within Malaysia itself, compared to other within Southeast Asia, we are not too bad. Yeah, in terms of recovery, we are at minus 47%. And this is led, of course, the recovery led very much by Australia and New Zealand. Dr. Ian, that's lovely to hear. Yeah. Again, zooming right straight into Southeast Asia, Vietnam has already surpassed its 2019 numbers. And where we stand now is what we've seen earlier. Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, as of end October, has actually came up back to be the top 10 routes within the world in terms of city pair. Now, question now becomes, what do we all look like? We are all travelers, right? So we have seen, many have been said about digitalization, so I wouldn't dwell so much into that, right? We all know that people stay longer, right? And whether mixing leisure with business, that's a given. Earlier this year, we see shorter booking period. But however, what we have seen in the past 3-4 months, that is kind of short-lived. We are seeing much more advanced booking, and that also shows the confidence of our travelers in traveling. Yeah, we have seen the allure of secondary destinations, people going to off-the-beat tracks. Yeah, people want to explore places that they've never seen before, also to be a little bit more safe in view that less crowded areas. Yeah, healthier lifestyle, and we look at mental wellness, we look at our physical wellness as well. And who we have seen traveling really is the millennials. Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say I'm a millennial, but I'm not. Yeah, and of course, what we have seen, like what Javier has shared, the luxury travel has also increased, as we have seen earlier. Now, the rise of a new segment, the digital nomads, literally Malaysia has actually spearheaded this digital nomad visa, which I'm sure MDAC, as part of the panelists tomorrow, will be able to share more. We have also seen Thailand doing it, yeah, and Indonesia has yet to do it, but they can actually work under the existing visa. Now, we see a lot of opportunities of such for the future traveler. Number one, travel tech. Everybody knows it is a must. So I wouldn't dwell so much into that. We talk about automation. We've seen vehicles which is automatically driven, yeah, and that's really something that we are even exploring. And I would also call out to my fellow players within the tourism industry to start looking into that area. We've seen demographic and social changes over the past couple of years. And actually, if we look at in 2050, there will be a rise in terms of the older population Yeah, and I believe that's something that we all must be aware of, because we, as the travel provider, we need to make sure that our products match the segment that will be coming. Buy now, pay later, obviously a hit, and Web3 is really what we are looking at and growing at a tremendous speed at 25 times, which we see will be coming in 2030. Yeah. Last but not least, sustainability. We have the experts with us today, but I will just very briefly share what it means for us at Malaysia Aviation Group. As a background, I mean, sorry for my, I'm from Malaysia Airlines, Malaysia Aviation Group. Yeah, we are the national carrier of the country. Just a show of hands if any of you heard of Malaysia Airlines. I hope so. I hope you have flown with us, into the beautiful country of state of Sabah. Yeah, so with us, a couple of things that I would like to share. With the rise, I mean, we are now coming back into recovery stage, as I said earlier, right? Very key thing is we need to know who are our segment, who are our customers moving forward, and what do they look like and what they are looking for. So for us, our priority is number one. Customer is our center of gravity. We make sure that every product that we develop really is to address their needs, to address their changes in behavior and their preferences. And so it's something that I would also call out to my industry fellow players. Look into what are the products that will suit them. So example, MH Shuttle, you saw how Kuala Lumpur and Singapore actually became the top 10 sectors of pairing cities, right? And this MH Shuttle product is actually created just for this shuttle between Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. Yeah, we have BizPro because we know that the travel of the corporates have changed tremendously, and our corporate programs have also need to change to that. MH Explorer, if you look at the bottom, is a student program, student digital program. Everybody now goes on digital, and that's a program specially dedicated for our students. We have fly passes for Malaysia, ASEAN, and other products that we have brought along. We talk about flexibility. Yeah, we talk about fly now, pay later. We talk about bonus site trip that we, as part of our national carrier agenda, we want our travelers into Malaysia to spend more time, to spend more days within the beautiful country of Malaysia. And this bonus site trip is where they land in Kuala Lumpur, which is our hub, and we give them a free flight to anywhere within Peninsular Malaysia and potentially to Sabah, Sarawak as well. Yeah? What does it also mean? That we need to do things very differently. Yeah? We recently launched our new safety video on board. It is not so much of the conventional safety video, to be honest. I hope you guys, I'm not sure, have you all had a chance to look at it? Yeah? Do you all like it? Is it okay? Is it okay? It's actually somewhat 180-degree shift from what a safety video has always been. But actually, the reason behind this is really, when we look at pandemic, aviation was one of the last to recover. The other one that's badly affected is the performing arts culture. I mean, the industry, right? Up to now, and they were the last to come back with their theater, production, and so on. So that's where the idea propped up that let's do this together, with the performing arts industry. And we came up with something to really feature the icons, the great things, the mixed culture and heritage of Malaysia, and that is literally what Malaysia is all about. Have a look at it when you guys have time, yeah? Of course, part of our fleet modernization is to address what's the current need of our consumers, looking at lighter seats, lightweight leather that's on board our 738s, and this is also the very first time we have put in our iconic batik onto our seat itself. And of course, the 330 Neos that will be coming in very quickly. Everybody's on e-commerce now, right? I'm sure all of us here has done online shopping before, right? Back in 2019, I wouldn't dare to say that, but today, I know all of us here would have done an online shopping somehow, somewhere, and Journify is actually one of the e-commerce product of Malaysia Aviation Group. It has 3 key components: discover new places within Malaysia. Yeah? The aim is really to promote, say, the best rojak that's behind your house, or the best waterfall that sits in the next road from your house, right? Other people would not know it, but it is time for us to help promote local businesses and to plan a trip to these interesting places, and of course, shop your favorites, especially the best of local Malaysia. we have also introduced J to you, where you order online and you literally get your products delivered to you at the boarding gate at KLIA A1. Yeah? Well, of course, nothing goes on with the consumer now without the idea of sustainability. As what my fellow panelists have said, airlines, our business every day, unfortunately, is not doing very much good things to the environment, but that doesn't mean that we stop doing it, but that just means that we need to put more attention in terms of how are we going to contribute to the economy in the future for sustainability. Now, we have launched our sustainability blueprint, but it is not just about the environment. Yeah? It is about us building a better planet that's environmentally. It is about us having a better community, talking about equality, talking about gender equality, talking about a conducive workspace. And also, last but not least, to build trust when we have proper governance. Yeah? So we are fully supportive of the 4 SDGs that we are committed to. And this is just very overview, the key things that we are looking at. We drill into the details of it, and not just in terms of principally what we should do, but we look into how do we build structures around the whole organization, and that's the group of Malaysia Aviation Group, to make sure that SAF investment is something that we are looking at. As you know, sustainable aviation fuel is not something that's very easy to be done. It is something that you need the entire ecosystem, your suppliers, your infrastructure providers, the whole value chain needs to come together to make it a sustainable product. Yeah? As you know, in brief, SAF costs us about 6 times more than a normal fuel, and that is currently the fuel price is already very high, double of what it used to be. Yeah? So on that note, it is tough, but it is something that we are dedicated to get at. We are building our robust reporting structure as well, but most importantly, we can start where the home is, right? Which is within our staff, within Malaysia Aviation Group, instilling the right behavior at our workplaces, and of course, fostering stronger partnerships. We have key targets that we are aiming for, and literally every single target of it has the plan that we are committing ourselves to. I will not bore you with all the details, but take it as if you are interested, or shall we have opportunities, please, we can have conversation after this when it comes to sustainability, the pathway that we have taken. Yeah, starting our launch of Blueprint in 2021, we have then moved on with a lot of partnership. We started our SAF flight even during the pandemic, to be honest, using with our mass cargo that was flying from Amsterdam right down to Kuala Lumpur, and we are now at 3rd and 4th SAF fuel flights from Kuala Lumpur itself. We have also done a lot of upcycling using our leather from our old seats, using our iconic batik from our cabin crew, and these are the things that form part of the sustainability, but to be honest, it is just scratching the surface. Yeah, the commitment is to do more and continuous committing to these initiatives that we bring along up to 2050, where it's net zero. Now, we've seen all these changes in terms of consumers, in terms of the industry, in terms of products, in terms of, well, everything, right? I mean, whatever we do now, you see people are with masks are much more important. My 2.5-year-old girl, before we step out of the house, she will tell me, wear your mask. Yeah, and that's the shift in everything. But one thing, before I end, is one thing remains constant, and that is Malaysian hospitality. Some of the earlier speakers today have noted that this Malaysian hospitality is absolutely iconic. It is something that uniquely recognizable, uniquely owned by Malaysian. Yeah, sorry, I'm just a bit proud of being a Malaysian, yeah? And it is something that's innate in all of us as Malaysia because of our mixed heritage, how we grew up with, the environment that we grew up with, it's making us to demonstrate this Malaysian hospitality even when nobody is looking, even when we are meeting old friends or new. It is this Malaysian hospitality that you can't be replicated, and it's imitable. Yeah? So with that, ladies and gentlemen, last 2 minutes of your time, let us have a look at the video of Malaysian hospitality, and that we aspire to pass it on to everybody we meet, and from generations and for the generations to come, because this is Malaysia all about. Thanks. Pass it back. Thank you.
Malaysian hospitality.
Look out the window next to me.
It's how we were brought up.
Describe the world that you could see.
Illuminating all that we do.
Racing clouds in dappled light. Watching day turn into night seamlessly.
Coming from our friends.
Still today I can't compare.
In our history.
What we have and what we share.
In the smallest of gestures.
The world's as big as I had dreamed. The life is better than it seemed from way down there.
And every kind of family.
Oh, it's the way you made me feel. When we're together behind the wheel.
To know and care.
Doesn't matter how far we go.
About what our guests.
'Cause I know.
And passengers need.
'Cause I know. We're already home.
It inspires us to be at our best.
We're already home.
Even when no one's watching.
We're already home.
Our story is told in how we treat one another.
We're already home.
Stories we pass on to those we meet. And to those who come after. Malaysian hospitality. It defines us all and guides us into the future. This is home. This is Malaysian hospitality.
To our visitors, selamat datang to beautiful Malaysia, and to Malaysians, welcome home.
We're already home.
Yinmei, that was a heartwarming video, and of course, the Malaysia Airlines brand has always been very resounding, very sort of, always in your face in the sense that it is homecoming. It feels warm. It feels, it's luxurious but very comforting as well. And I wanted to really just pick on the point you spoke about the video with the sort of artistic streak to it. That wasn't a conventional Malaysian Airlines video, and so obviously a lot of people were saying, well, what's happened to Malaysia Airlines? But it was such a great example for an industry to sort of take that bold move to say, unprecedented times, we're going to do something out of the box. We're going to think out of the box. Ladies and gentlemen, we have got questions coming in from slido.com. Panelists, thank you for your presentations. We've taken a bit of time, but I know there's a lot of excitement from the floor as well. The first question I've received, and I'm going to open this to all our panelists here. Please feel free to take this question if you feel you would like to answer it. It's about local community engagement. And the question is, how do we push for a sustainable pathway into the future where community engagement is concerned? But this question also has an element asking, can we overdo it? If there's too much engagement, will this ruin the normal way of life so as to not have engagement be too disruptive? Panel.
I'll simply answer that question.
One second, Dr. Ian. We'll need your mic on. Yes.
You hear me? Okay. I think, first of all, there's two things there. First of all, communities need to decide, do they want to do tourism? That's really important because tourism's not for everybody. It all depends on where the destination is. And you will succeed as a tourism destination if that community buys in to what the product and the offering is. Because in the academic literature, it's called social license to operate. The tourism that you do has the benefit and the backing of the community, and it's come from it's a bottom up and a top down. So it's about social license to operate, and also, do you want to do tourism?
Would you like to add?
Is this working?
Yes.
I'll just add one point. It's not my expertise whatsoever, but I think, if anything, the pandemic has probably shown us that a lot of communities rely on tourism, but there's also ways that it can be overdone. we talk a lot about over-tourism. Maybe not all academics agree with that terminology, but I think there's it's been overdone in places. And I think if you look at a place like Venice in Italy, for example, I think that has shown the pathway of actually communities have the power to change how tourism is coming back. And I think as a community, you can look at that example as we are part of the offering and we have a voice and we should have some stake in how tourism is coming back and how tourism is being managed. And so I think take this as an opportunity to look at the future and think about how you want tourism to come back.
Just to really add one quick point, I totally agree. It's actually interesting because we're seeing this a lot in post-COVID tourism strategies or response strategies, that there is a trend actually perhaps away from focusing so much on the visitor and what the visitor wants, and then trying to provide that at all cost, to engaging the community and trying to help address the needs of the community more. So destination planning, you know, and that would involve community engagement. So for anyone who's interested in that, I think Vanuatu has actually done that really well, to incorporate their traditional, the custom knowledge and traditional values into their tourism planning, and has really placed the community and community well-being at the center of their sustainable tourism strategy and recovery strategy.
Ladies and gentlemen, the slides are available or can be made available to you should you want to use them as a reference. But also this question has come through, and again it's open to the panel. You've all shared your data, your ideas, and even moving forward what solutions for the future should be. But what would you say is the easiest, quickest solution? Perhaps a better question is, what is the lowest hanging fruit as we move forward? Javier, would you have an answer? In terms of any industry or organization wanting to level up their service, what could they go to? What could be the starting point for this to resuscitate sectors within the larger industry?
Well, there's two things. There's the recovery in quantitative terms, so how fast and how quickly we can recover the tourism numbers for the good of the local communities, for the good of the businesses, both big and small. But there's also the qualitative transformation. So I think we're in that double path of recovering the tourism numbers on one hand, but also transforming the sector in what we've just mentioned before, in more sustainable way, greener way, decarbonizing. So to answer your question, what organizations or companies need to do is first of all reassess how they are conducting their business, how they are conducting their tourism activity, they're providing the service. Is it sustainable in the long term? Is it benefiting the local residents, like you just said? Is it? I mean, with tourism is two ways. It's for the good of the traveler, but it also has to benefit the local residents. So you need to have a dialogue between the policymakers and the local residents themselves. And you just mentioned Venice, but another example is Barcelona or Amsterdam. You know, now we're talking about recovery. Before the pandemic, we were talking about over-tourism, which is, as you said, arguably not a very appropriate term. It's not so much a question of over-tourism, it's more a question of management. So there's no over-tourism, there's under-management. And having local residents in that dialogue is very important. So businesses should take that into account and work hand in hand with the policymakers.
Thank you. Just to add, and I agree with what you said, but just to, thank you for that question, by the way, I appreciate it, but I would actually like to argue that we perhaps need to move away from focusing on the quick fixes. I totally understand why people want to know, you know, what is the one thing we can all do? What's the quickest we can do to solve all of our problems? But the reality is, and I'm using a lot of systems thinking in my work, and fact is that this tendency to address the symptoms of problems with quick fixes is not helping us to address the underlying problems that cause those events from happening in the first place. So I'd like to encourage you all to think about perhaps some initiatives that we all discussed today, and appreciate that some of those things might take a bit of time. Community engagement, a lot of the things that we've already discussed, they're really important, but perhaps they are a little bit more difficult to implement and take more time. But the outcome those initiatives produce will probably be a lot more effective.
I'd just like to add, I totally agree with that. And I think as an industry, for decades, we've been focused on quantity only, just volume, numbers of people, and we still do. I do too. I mean, it's the easiest way of tracking if things are back to normal, is to just track how many flights are going, how many people are going. But we've been so focused on that. And before the pandemic, I think there was a bit of a wave of where we started to focus on quality, or at least we use that term quality. Now, to me, quality means higher spending, so richer people. Let's have less people, but let them be rich. I don't think that's the solution either. Putting up prices to go into a national park, sure, you get more money for less people, but at the same time, is that really a sustainable, a cultural, socially sustainable thing to do, to only look at the wealthy people in the world and to just not think about people that might not have that money? I don't think that's a sustainable solution either. So I totally agree that there probably isn't a quick fix, but we need to think about that much deeper than just looking at value and volume at such simple terms.
All right. A lot of sharing today, again, a lot of perspectives and suggestions moving forward. I'd like to give our panelists 30 seconds each, starting from you, Yin-Mei, to summarize our discussion today. It is slightly over 1:30, so everyone's edgy for lunch.
I'll just take 15 minutes. Guys, I
15
think...
seconds, you mean?
Oh, sorry, 15 seconds. Yeah, just to make sure whether are you guys paying attention. Very clearly, guys, I think tourism clearly is on recovery. This is where, in terms of collaboration, in terms of teamwork, every single party within the tourism ecosystem needs to be highly agile, highly resilient in capturing this revenge travel that we are talking about, but yet at the same time have a balance to build a sustainable tourism in the future. So looking forward to working with everybody and to see that graph that Javier has shared keep on climbing.
Thank you. Dr. Ian.
Learn the words to the Spice Girls song, what do you really, 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 really want? Then go and do something about it.
All right, short and sweet. Dr. Joanna.
Thank you. I think we all understand this is a really critical decade. We've heard lots of reasons for why that is. We have to meet peak emissions and steep decarbonization from there on. So I think all of the presentations we've had today really highlight that we have to think more critically about the benefits we want tourism to deliver and at what cost.
Dr. Wuta.
It's really tough. I think we're at a sort of dichotomy at the moment where at one end we're very hopeful and very optimistic about stuff coming back. At the same time, we're struggling with making it more sustainable. I don't have the answers, but I think it's an interesting time to work in the industry, as it always is. And then I really hope that everyone in the room can contribute to finding some way somewhere in the middle.
Thank you. Mr. Javier.
Thank you. Well, I presented a lot of data in my presentation. I hope that wasn't overwhelming for ladies and gentlemen in the public and watching through the YouTube channel. But basically, I showed that the recovery is underway, that we are 30-something% below the 2019 levels. The recovery will happen eventually. In 2023, we'll probably see some regions like Europe, which accounts for 50% of the whole international tourism sector, recover faster. The Americas also. Harder to say for Africa and the Middle East because there's more data gaps and they're also slightly more volatile regions in terms of travel. And then Asia Pacific is lagging a little bit behind. But I'm sure as the restrictions are lifted gradually next year, we will see a recovery. But again, as I said before, it's not just about quantitative, it's about the transformation of the sector, how we rethink the tourism industry, which is not just beneficial from an economic point of view, but also from a social point of view. You need to travel not just to earn money and to support livelihoods and businesses, but also for mutual understanding, for mutual respect, and for mutual comprehension and empathy.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel for today. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you, my esteemed panelists as well. That has been our discussion today on decoding tourism futures, foresight, and scenarios. I'd like to pass the control back to the MCs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give a warm round of applause one more time to our moderator and also to our panelists. Thank you very much. All right, Melissa. Now, before we break for lunch, we need to mention that we are going to organize a very short lucky draw. Now, who wants to win a prize? Who wants to win a prize in the form of an airline ticket?
All right.
I hear a lot of you. Ooh.
Suddenly lunch can wait.
Yes. So, Melissa and I are going to go up here, but we need our very friendly Miss Lau to be on stage together with myself
Sorry,
and
Miss
Melissa.
Lau, yes, we should have asked you to remain on
Sorry.
stage. She'll
All
be
right,
giving out.
we're going to make this as quick as possible because I hear tummies grumbling in the hall. So is mine, so is Melissa and Miss Lau's as well. We're going to transform the screen into an arcade of some sort. Because,
into a wheel of fortune, if you're
There we go.
Yes.
So, 2 prizes that we're going to give out from Malaysia Airlines. Thank you very much, Miss Lau. And let's welcome our wonderful and beautiful cabin crew on the stage here. Would you like to just mention what the prize is?
So the first 2 prizes from Malaysia Airlines would be an economy class return ticket from Kuala Lumpur to any domestic destination.
But
So-
Miss Lau, what happens if it's someone from KK who won the ticket? Can they change it from KK to somewhere else?
Okay, to Kuala Lumpur.
You heard it from her. You can change it. All right. So any domestic destination.
Yes. So
All right.
if you've been meaning to take that holiday now, you don't have an excuse not to if you win this ticket, right?
Yes.
All right, so shall we spin the wheel?
Let's go. Let's shuffle.
Let's go.
Let's take a look at the screen over there. Ladies and gentlemen, your name is going to appear here. And Miss Zelihu, are you here?
522939, are you here?
Zelihu. Now here's the fun. Oh, Miss Zelihu. There we go. She's downstairs. Can we accept that? Oh, she's not here today.
She's not here today?
Oh, so we have to go next. I am so sorry.
Look how quickly everyone was cooperating.
Yes.
Let's go to the next number, okay?
I love
Thank
it.
you guys.
I love it.
Thanks for that suggestion.
If
we'll
we
move
can,
on.
if we can have this cooperation, the tourism industry is going to
And we have Miss
be
Dima
fabulous.
Akkad.
There we go.
Miss Dima, are you here?
Dima? Yes, no, or someone who knows Dima,
Come on,
tell us
guys.
that she's not
Give
here.
her 5 seconds before you do this. You're not even looking around the hall properly. No, Miss Dima's not here?
Calling once,
Going twice?
twice, onwards
Okay,
to
onwards.
the next one. Here we go. I see many happy faces here.
Mr. Kevin George Ukang. Are you here, Kevin George
Mr. Kevin,
Ukang?
are you here? I hear applauses. Mr. Kevin.
No?
No?
Is he not here? Going once? Going twice? Are his friends throwing him under the bus already? They're like, no, he's not in the hall. He left. Okay.
All right, onwards to the next one.
Next one.
I hope that your name will be called here. Here we go. Dr. Juliana.
Dr. Juliana.
There we go. Is she right there? She is there. Dr. Juliana, come on out. Well done. See, it pays to stay in
Exactly,
conferences like this. Yeah, Melissa?
Now you get an air ticket and lunch.
There.
I mean,
Well done, Dr. Juliana. Please come on up and she will go home with a complimentary return ticket brought to you by Malaysia Airlines, our official airlines at the World Tourism Conference 2022. Now remember, we have one more prize from Malaysia Airlines and then 2 more lucky draw prizes from some of our sponsors here before we break for lunch. All right, Dr. Juliana, well done to you. Thank you so much. All right, let's move on to the next one. Melissa,
yes, shall we spin the wheel?
let's spin the wheel. Let's shuffle it. Mr.
Mr.
Brent Anderson. Mr. Anderson,
Mr.
are you
Brent
here?
Anderson, are you here?
Are you here, Mr. Anderson? Yes, no, going once, twice. I see a lot of hands like. All right, next. reject, and shuffle away. This is getting exciting, ya, Melissa?
Encik Muhammad Abdul Rani Muhammad Yaakob. Are you
Encik Muhammad
here?
Abdul Rani ada
Oh, yes.
di dalam sini, ada?
Yes, he's coming in. There he is.
Is that him? Oh, he's right there. Well done. There we have it. We have 2 more prizes to give away, and I hope that you will stay on for this one. It's quite exciting. Maybe some of you are looking for a staycation somewhere. But first, we will allow Mr. Abdul Rani to receive his prize here. Congratulations to our 2 winners. Now, Melissa and I were looking at the list. Don't worry, there will be another lucky draw prize pool later at the end of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Now.
And there will be more airline-related prizes to give out. But first, Melissa, anyone who wants a staycation somewhere, there's a resort that we would like to mention. Oh, but we have a video first that we need
Yes,
to
before
show.
that, you gotta earn your win, people. So we got a short video. I promise it'll be very short, and then we'll continue with the 2 more prizes coming up.
Let's take a look.
As one of Malaysia's leading hospitality brands, Lotus Group has grown to become an entrepreneurial powerhouse, with operations spanning across a wide range of industries ever since its inception in 1987. The man behind the founding of Lotus Group is Tan Sri Dato' R. Duraisingam, an entrepreneur who developed a passion for business since he was a child. He attained much of his business smarts from his late father, and with the help of his family, Tan Sri Dato' Duraisingam has built the company into what has become the well-known Lotus Group. Lotus Group has established its foothold in the world of entrepreneurship with businesses mainly in the F&B, hotel, plantation, and entertainment industries. Over the years, it has also diversified into real estate, healthcare, technology, and construction, amongst many others. The Lotus Family Restaurant marks the beginning of this business empire, and it would remain as one of the most recognized Indian restaurants in Malaysia today. This restaurant offers delicious Indian cuisine that is appreciated by both locals and foreigners alike in a luxurious ambient setting and 5-star quality service. Lotus Group boasts a diverse hotel portfolio across cities and nature spots. Tucked in the idyllic coastal area of Johor, the Lotus Desaru Beach Resort and Spa offers the perfect place to take families and groups of any size for a beach holiday or MICE events. With 1,317 outstanding rooms and amenities, this award-winning resort can cater for up to 30,000 people at any one time, with its halal and HACCP certified kitchen facilities. Head further south and you'll find the Lotus Seaview Beach Resort and Spa, a great place for those who'd like to wake up to a beautiful sea view. Besides its lovely amenities, the resort lies a short distance away from its private beachfront, as well as other sites that are perfect for nature tours. The group has also established itself in the entertainment industry, mainly dealing with cinema operations as well as film distribution. In less than a decade, Lotus 5-Star Cinemas has grown to become one of the largest cinema chains in Malaysia. Together with the recently acquired MBO Cinemas in 2021, both cinema chains boast a total of 139 screens in 24 locations across the country. The company screens multilingual movies under various genres, making them a cinema chain with a multicultural identity. Another arm of the group, Lotus 5-Star AV, focuses primarily on purchasing and distributing Indian, Malay, Chinese, and Hollywood films, and it has done so for more than 20 years. In 2004, the group moved into the agriculture industry, securing 2 estates of over 7,000 acres under Lotus Plantation. the Dutaville Estate in Perak focuses on palm oil production, while the Tamarai Estate in Negeri Sembilan produces fruits and vegetables such as durian, banana, coconut and more. In line with its exceptional presence in the hospitality industry, the group has added Lotus Care into its business portfolio. Established in 2019, Lotus Care is a premium assisted living facility that provides a broad range of amenities and services for various levels of dependency to ensure that the residents will enjoy a great quality of life during their stay. Having built a solid foundation and trusted reputation, there's no questioning Lotus Group's standing in the business world today. With focus on quality and sustainability, Lotus Group aims not just to drive its own continual growth, but also to maintain its standing as one of the most trusted brands in the region.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Melissa, would you like to introduce to you our presenter?
Yes, for this, may I invite Miss Indra Gandhi Pillai, who is the CEO of Lotus Desaru Beach Resort and Spa. Let's give her a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, while we await for her to reach at the middle of the stage here, let's go ahead and shuffle. And I hope
Shall we
that
tell them
it's
the prize
your
first,
name.
then? Shall we tell them the prize first?
Yes. Oh, yes. Goodness gracious.
Yes, they don't know what they're in for.
Sorry, I'm hungry, I guess.
But a
and
quick
everyone
one.
is.
So it's a 3-day, 2-night stay in a penthouse at the Lotus Desaru Beach Resort and Spa. And this is the best part. It includes breakfast and theme park tickets for 6 persons. So this prize is for 6 persons. Is that my understanding? 6 persons. Okay.
Not
so,
only you could go, your family could go together.
or you can bring 5 people from this conference. Okay,
There you
let's go. Let's see who the winner is.
Here we go. Mr. Timo Guzman. He's right there.
There you go.
Congratulations, sir.
Mr. Timo. So you will have to go to Johor now and bring 5 friends from the conference.
Congratulations, sir. Congratulations, Mr. Guzman. He's already thinking, okay, I'm gonna alter my flight plans already. All right, we have one more prize to give out. Maybe Melissa would like to mention.
My pleasure. This one is in Batu Feringhi, Penang. And it is a 2-day, 1-night stay and in a sea view room, inclusive of breakfast for 2 persons at the Hard Rock Hotel, Penang. All right.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's see who the lucky party goers are going to Hard Rock.
Let's go.
Let's see. Mr. Gyanmani Nepal. Is he here?
Mr. Nepal, are you here? I hear claps and applauses.
Anyone? No?
Mr.
Going,
Nepal?
All right, hands are waving, going no.
No,
Going
no,
once.
going once.
Going twice.
Twice.
All right, the next name, go.
Next.
Muhammad Farid, are you here?
Wow, just
No?
one name.
No. Oh,
I'm just
all
scared
right.
there might be 5 Farids in the house.
Okay, it's not here. All right, shall we speed this up? Next.
All right,
name.
next. Miss Trisha Mojulat Nichols. Are you here? Miss Mojulat Nichols? Calling once,
Going
twice, and next.
Next name. Let's see. She's probably at lunch now, right?
Probably, sadly.
And regretting her choices in life.
Yeah. Mr. Rajiv,
Rajiv
Semwal.
Mr. Rajiv, are you here?
Mr.
Would you like
Rajiv,
to go
are
to
you here?
Penang? No, not in the
I
cards
hear-
for you.
I hear hands just telling us to do this, Melissa. All right.
Okay, let's
Calling
go.
once, twice, and let's go. Next. We're very determined to find you as the winner. Shelly Leslie. Shelly, are you here? No?
No, that was a resounding no from this section, okay?
Calling once, twice, no to Shelly. All right, next. Sadly. Mr. Kenneth O. Mr. Kenneth?
No, Mr. Kenneth O is not here. Okay.
Also, not here. All right.
All right.
Shall we
Next.
go to the next one? Miss
Zunaida
Zunaida
Hamza.
Hamza.
I have a good feeling about
I
this
have
one.
a good feeling about this one. All right.
Or were they just, are you here?
Is she here?
No? Then why you guys clap? She's not here.
It's probably
Don't
someone
make me
that they
excited.
know.
Okay. All right,
Miss
moving on.
Zunaida,
Next.
are we here? No. All right, moving on. Sadly. The rule is you got to be here. Miss Catherine, Portugal.
Miss Catherine.
Miss
Catherine, are you
Catherine,
here?
Miss Portugal, are you here? No. It's okay.
All
this
right.
increases your chances of winning as long as you stay here.
All right, let's go to the next one.
Let's go.
Mr. Ramasamy Sankaran, are you here? Encik Ramasamy? No? All right. All right, okay,
right,
let's
next.
go next. Olivia Wong Lee Ling.
Olivia
Wong
Wong.
Lee Ling, no?
Wow, so many names.
All right. This hungry crowd is turning into an angry crowd. Let's go.
Let's go, let's
I'm
go.
fearing my life. Let's go.
Here we go. Encik
Wan
Wan Muhammad
Wasif Wan Muhammad.
Pun tak
No.
ada.
Macam mana ni?
Okay,
mana
next.
kawan-kawan kita semua?
Let's
Let's
go.
go. Yeah, I'm not controlling this,
Zachary
okay?
Mobijon.
Zachary Mobijon.
Zach, are you in the house?
I know this guy, so Zach, are you here?
You got to be here, man. No?
Okay.
All right.
Let's go.
Let's go.
You know, I'm just saying, if you guys pretend you're that person and come up, we
Mr.
wouldn't
Kevin
know.
Yuan.
We wouldn't know. Just an idea.
Kevin
Encik
Yuan, are you
Kevin
here?
Yuan. I'm just joking, okay? Kevin Yuan, are you here?
No,
No?
yes,
All right,
no.
Kevin has left the building.
Next.
Next.
Let's go.
His Excellency Francis Muhoro.
One of our foreign dignitaries. Your Excellency,
No?
Mohoro, are you here? No. All right. Next.
Let's go. Z Anwar.
Z Anwar. Yes,
Yes.
finally. Thank you.
Thank you, Z. You guys are clapping because it means you can now go and eat, right? Come on, guys. But it's also for you, Z. Congratulations, Tanya.
If you don't
And-
mind, Melissa, I'm just going to go down here while Z claims her prize.
All right.
I'm just going to mention a few announcements here. Later on, we'll be putting a QR code on the screen. We will need your help to fill in a survey. And delegates who made reservations for the technical tours on the 30th, we will need you to kindly reconfirm your tour at the hospitality desk at the foyer. You can do that during lunch or even just before we go for the official dinner later tonight. Now, lunch, by the way, will be served at Kinabalu 3 Level 2. All right, ladies and gentlemen, time is really, really short. I am not sure when to call the delegates back. Trixie, Jaya, but my time here says 2:15. We need to be back here in the hall.
We do understand that the session 2 starts at 2:30 p.m. and the dream is to have everyone back here by 2:15. The reality is another thing, but we are, after all, envisioning futures.
Yeah.
So let's hope you guys will be back here in time. We'll try to start at 2:30 p.m. Enjoy your lunch and thank you for your patience.
Thank you all very much. See you back here at between 2:15 and 2:30.